than you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
So I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, you make the pass, yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 18. Thanks for joining me. Go to inallairness.com for show notes and plenty more features. The social hub for the podcast is facebook.com/inallairness. If you haven't already, please like the page and join the growing community of fans. Add the podcast to your RSS feed or iTunes so you never miss another show. It's also available on Stitcher, BlackBerry, Player FM, TuneIn Radio and numerous other podcatchers. I love hearing from listeners. On either site, you can send voicemail comments or questions. With your permission, I'd love to include your feedback on future episodes. You can follow me on Twitter @inallairness. Today I'm joined by Aaron Steen again. We're going to be chatting about the 1996 NBA season. Aaron, how are you going, mate?
Hey Adam, thank you for having me back. We must have done something right the first time.
It's certainly nice to know that our listens are continuing to go up even a good month and a few weeks on. So we're going very close to our 400th listen on the first episode. So I think that it'll just continue to go from strength to strength. So we certainly did many things right, judging by the response from the listeners, which is great. So today we'll be chatting about the 96 NBA season, which is obviously synonymous with the 72-10 Bulls, Jordan getting the fourth title in 6 years and the beginning of the second three-peat. So plenty of interesting things happened in this season.
Yeah, the other Bull season was, one for the ages, obviously with the other 72 wins. But if you have a look at the numbers behind those wins, they had the best offensive and defensive rating of all the teams in the NBA. Their point differential on the season was over 12 points per game. And when you consider that they added 6 new players into the squad from the other previous season, it clicked in a fantastic way.
So they went 72-10, as most people would obviously know from that 1996 record-setting season. They led the league in points per game at 105.2. On the opposite end, unfortunately, the Vancouver Grizzlies, the expansion team, they went 15-67. Not quite as successful as they would have hoped, but at least they still racked up at least double-digit wins because at one stage they had some terrible losing streaks. The Bulls had a Hall of Fame nucleus with Dennis Rodman, the new arrival in town, Scottie Pippen and obviously MJ. That sort of set the tone for the Bulls going forward, where pretty much every regular season game was one that they wanted to win, and obviously there was talk of the 70 wins before the season pretty much even got going because of that nucleus. So what were your thoughts on that particular edition, getting Rodmania or Rodzilla to join the Bulls at that stage, mate?
Well, the Bulls obviously took a bit of a risk in getting Dennis because he'd worn out his welcome in San Antonio. A previous guest of yours, head coach Bob Hill, and the Spurs organisation had obviously just had a gutful of him because they dumped him off to Chicago for a pretty cheap price, I thought, in Will Perdue. The risk was huge, but the chance of being a huge reward as well was there, and the rest is history on that season.
It paid dividends by bringing Rodman in, and thanks for mentioning that Bob Hill discussion. That was a really good chat that I had with Bob Hill. For those that haven't actually listened to it, I'll just do some shameless self-promotion throughout the episode here. If you go to inallairness.com/14, that'll bring you straight to the page with the Bob Hill interview. So feel free to go back and check that out. He has some really great things to say about his time in the NBA and beyond. So that was definitely a good little discussion we had there. Now, there was a number of great games throughout the season for that Bulls 72-10. Like most regular season games are pretty forgettable by the time you come playoff time, but there's a couple in particular that I wanted to quickly talk about. The one at Vancouver where the Bulls were down late in the fourth quarter in their game at Vancouver late in November. Do you know the game I'm referring to and what Jordan got up to in the fourth quarter?
Yeah, very famous game, isn't it? MJ obviously wasn't too excited about the prospect of losing to an expansion team. He put on a bit of a show for the Vancouver fans in the fourth quarter.
He did. He lit up, I think, 19 points in the fourth quarter. He might have got 17 straight at one stage, something crazy. Just lit them up, and kept the Bulls going. They had an incredible run throughout the season. I was looking at some of the stats before our chat today. 9 different occasions in the 95-96 season, they had 5+ win streaks at least, and 2 of those win streaks were 13 and 18 games. So that's just staggering on their way to 72-10. So some incredible streaks that they put together. Another great game was the MJ versus Magic Johnson, when Magic came back briefly for the Lakers in early February of 96, and the hype in the lead up to that game was just otherworldly. Did you remember at the time back here in Australia what was going on in terms of the MJ and the Bulls freight train that was just running through the league?
Oh, well, I mean, after Jordan had come back the previous season and come up short against Orlando in the playoffs, the hype and the anticipation for that first full season that Michael had back was off the charts all over the world, including here in Australia. And when you also add in the other new piece in Dennis Rodman as well, the anticipation was ridiculous. And I think that Magic's return during the season, being Magic, he's one of the top 5 players of all time. I think that even his return was overshadowed somewhat by just the regular season games of the Bulls. It was like having the Beatles come into town all throughout that season. So, yeah, the hype and anticipation of that season for the Bulls was enormous.
It was crazy. Here in Australia, we only maybe got 1 game a week, and the NBA action was pretty much it until the advent of pay television. But there was a newspaper that came out back at that stage, Pro Basketball Today. Were you ever a subscriber to that, or did you buy the occasional release of that newspaper?
No, definitely not the occasional one through the 96, 97, 98 every single week, because, you know, as you just mentioned, our exposure to the NBA back then was the other weekly game. That newspaper, as far as its box scores and information on the NBA, yeah, I got, even now, I guess it'd be like 15 years later, that I've got like stacks of it as tall as what I am at Mum and Dad's house still. So it was a pretty good source of info for us.
Definitely was, and I'm absolutely livid with myself to this day, because I had, for the first 140 or something issues that they released, including when they went from their black and white pages to colour pages, I'd only missed 2 issues since it was first released, and I had a great collection of them, and they were in pristine condition. But when we moved house at one stage, for some unknown reason, I was deliberating about it and just turfed the entire lot. I cannot believe to this day that I did that. It was just stupid. What a great memento it would be to still have those, at least even to know that they're in storage somewhere, but who knows why. I just turfed them.
I'm sure that everyone's had it when you move house, you make a decision at the time that you look back on. And I know that when I moved house once when I was around 12 or 13 years old, Mum made me throw out all of my Transformers boxes.
Oh, crushed.
All of the boxes, pristine nick. And now, of course, the value of them is just ridiculous. So everyone has those storage ads.
Yeah, that's shattering, that sort of stuff, especially when you know how much they're worth now, given that if you have the original box as well, just to add insult to injury. Yeah, not good. Let's just transform and roll out. We'll continue talking about some other things to do with the NBA. As we said, the Bulls had an incredible streak throughout that 96 season, like many different win streaks. They only lost back-to-back games once in the entire season, and that was just following that Lakers-Bulls game in early February. They dropped a game at Denver, which they almost miraculously came back to win when they were down by close to 30 points. And then they dropped the following game as well to the Phoenix Suns. So pretty incredible regular season by the time they wrapped things up and went 72-10.
Yeah, even going into the playoffs, which was even more impressive considering that the pace of play and the pressure and playoff intensity, but considering all of that, the way that they just peeled off win streak after win streak was just incredible. I know that a lot of doubters speak about the saturation of the league or the dilution of the league with the expansion teams, but to reel off win streaks like they did and with the point margins that they peeled off as well was an incredible season.
We'll get to the playoffs shortly, but I think at one stage they were like 14-1 in the playoffs. That's after Game 3 in the finals, but that's just going from memory. But I know they stumbled a little bit in Games 4 and 5 of the finals, but they were on some kind of tear at that stage. So when we look at some of the award winners for the season, Jordan won MVP honours, averaging just over 30 points a game, 6.6 boards, over 4 assists and also 2.2 steals, so just some great numbers across the season, and he was named MVP of the year. Not really much of a surprise, I guess, given the season that they had, mate.
Yeah, well, after what happened to him in the previous playoffs against Orlando, you knew that he was out for blood that following season, and it was well reported even here, the amount of work that he put in during the off-season to work on his game. Even while he had the time to shoot Space Jam, he had the basketball court on set. NBA players are coming in and out and playing pickup games. He obviously worked very hard to redeem himself. Wouldn't have sat very well with him what happened at the playoffs beforehand.
That's right. That's at the great Jordan Dome that was set up during the filming of Space Jam. But that 1995 playoffs really is quite hazy in my memory, mate. I'm not even too sure it actually exists in the NBA record books. I think those games were actually stricken from the record.
The 95 playoffs, for me, the highlight of them, I guess, was the unveiling of the Jordan 11s, one of the top 5 most iconic pair of Jordans ever. MJ pulled out the Concord 11s in the series against Orlando and then wore them through to the next season as well. So I'm in the same boat, yeah.
Rookie of the year with 96 was Damon Stoudemire, also known as Mighty Mouse. He had a great rookie year, almost 20 points a game, 9 assists, 4 boards, and also pretty much 1.5 steals. So the great Mighty Mouse, for the Toronto Raptors no less, lit up the league and won Rookie of the Year.
I also found a well-known YouTube clip of Damon at draft day as well, and his reaction of being drafted by one of the expansion teams. You see David Stern walk out to the dais and announce with the 7th pick that he was picked by the Raptors, and he wasn't impressed at all. And the fact that it got caught on camera makes for very entertaining viewing, I got to say.
I would have seen it at the time, but I'll need to go back and check that, and I'll add it into the show notes as well with a link to be able to check that out if it was on YouTube. Some of the reactions of the players, their facial expressions and body language does tend to give away how they feel about being drafted by those teams, but it's a tough thing being drafted into an expansion team where you could have gone to any other number of possible better situations. And then he had to obviously go to Toronto no less too. So a pretty tough effort, but he certainly stood up and had a really good rookie campaign.
Yeah, he really did. Yeah, his expression on draft night, he threw his head back. He was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. But yeah, he put that aside and had a really good year for the Raptors.
Yeah. Now, the Defensive Player of the Year for 1996 was the glove, Gary Payton. He had a great season too. He had 19 points a game, 4 boards, 7.5 assists, and also 3 steals a game. So just some fantastic numbers for the glove too. So he was obviously in great form in 1996, him and Kemp, the main 2 men in Seattle, and obviously we know where they met the Bulls come finals time, but again, Payton, very good defender and perennially always known on the all-defensive team pretty much.
Yeah, a very young and talented Seattle Supersonics team in 95-96, made it all the way to the finals that year. It was undone a little bit the following year with some infighting and complaining about money and contracts and, Jim McElvain, to put it simply. So, but yeah, 95-96, a great Supersonics team led by Kemp and GP.
Definitely. Now that Jim McElvain contract he signed, I think this is totally from memory, so I could shoot myself in the foot here, but he signed something like a $35 million deal, or maybe over 5 years or something. I don't know what it was, but it was some crazy numbers at the time, and I think that put a lot of people's noses out of joint, and understandably, given that whilst he was obviously a role player or a complementary player, probably at best, with respect to him at the time, he made the most of that deal that was coming his way.
Yeah, over the years, these white centres have been synonymous with really, really poor contracts. If you go back even further, you look at John Koncak or John Contract, and the other contract that the offer sheet that the Pistons signed into, and then like the Hawks panicked and stupidly matched it. So yeah, they're the great white hopes.
I've never actually heard that John Contract. I've never heard that. That's surprising. That's very clever. I like that. So from now on, I'll just steal that and use it as my own. So good on you, mate. Thanks for that one.
You're welcome.
I also remember in one of the NBA Action episodes, one of the top 10 plays even, I think John Koncak was in there, and Jim Fagan at the time was doing the voiceover. He worded it beautifully, and the way he even said Koncak's name as if he was in the top 10 players was quite memorable. For some reason, 17 years later or whatever it is, I can still remember that, so that's crazy.
The more crazy thing is the fact that John Koncak was in the top 10 players.
True, because I think the way he worded it was, John Koncak?
Yeah,
like the way he said it.
Who the hell is this guy?
Yeah, why is he in the top 10? But he was at one particular stage, and if someone could actually direct me to that on YouTube somewhere, I'd be most appreciative, because that was fantastic. Now, let's talk most improved players. 1996, the most improved player was little George Murison, who had a really good season, actually. 14 points, 10 boards, and 2 blocks a game. So Georgie Murison came to the party and certainly lived up to... He had some pretty high expectations after a little while there at Washington. But a great season from George as he started to establish himself in the NBA, coming from Romania.
Yeah, he was 7'7", had legs on him like tree stumps, and was about as fast as what a tree was as well. But I think he won the hearts of a lot of NBA fans, in particular in Washington where he was playing. But it was good for him that he backed it up and had a decent season as well. And the Most Improved Player award was a testament to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you can average 14 points and 10 boards and throw in a couple of blocks a game, you'd be pretty happy with that as a definite candidate for most improved. He did raise his game considerably from the season before as well, so he did establish himself as an NBA centre and obviously
starting centre.
Yeah, that's right. And being 7'7", of course, he was pretty much as tall as a tree as well. So he's done well, Georgie. Now, the Sixth Man of the Year award for 96, the Bulls dominated a lot of the awards that season. The waiter, the Croatian sensation, Tony Kukoc, played 81 games and started only 20 of those, so he was well in contention to be Sixth Man of the Year. He had about 13 points, 4 boards, 3.5 assists, and also 1 steal per contest. So a great season by the waiter coming off the bench.
Tony was a player that I fell in love with immediately when he came to the Bulls in 93. The guy of that height, 6'11", so versatile, could shoot the three. When it was announced that Tony won the Sixth Man Award, he expressed his pleasure in the fact that he won. He also expressed his displeasure in the fact that he wanted to be a starter. So on that Bulls team, trying to crack that starting lineup, good luck, mate.
Yeah, exactly right. He was doing very well to even be the sixth man because they just had such a loaded team at that stage, but the role suited him really nicely. The Bulls were courting him for many years prior to him actually turning up and playing in the 94 season. It was 94, wasn't it, when he first started? 93, 94?
93, 94, yeah. And his contract for that season was second on the team, only to Jordan's. That was the last year that MJ played at the bargain basement salary of $3.8 million before he got those two big $30 million contracts before he finished up with the Bulls. But yeah, it was also well documented the ire that he drew from MJ and Scotty in particular with that contract that he got.
Yeah, and that even went back to the 92 Olympics when the Dream Team played Croatia and Pippen and Jordan put out an APB pretty much on Kukoc and tried to shut him down every time he even touched the ball when they played against one another. So that did go back a bit. They had a fair bit of history there, but they gelled together well, and when it mattered playing on the same team, they did all they could, and there was a lot of complementary players on that Bulls roster who really fit the bill, no pun intended, I guess, with Bill Wennington and whatnot, but they certainly gelled together really well, and that roster was just loaded with some great role players and ones that stepped up to the occasion when needed. So do you want to even maybe quickly chat about some of those players that were on the Bulls roster at the time? Who are some of the players that really stood out to you? Obviously, Ronnie Harp was a key player in the 96 team as well. He really took a hit to his game to be able to suit and fit in with what the Bulls were doing at the time, so he was a great role player too.
Yeah, it was really something different to see two guards at 6'6", off guards, traditional off guards, as your starting backcourt in an NBA team. But I guess a point forward like Scotty, they had the luxury of playing two bigger guards like that, and it obviously worked really, really well. But you mentioned before about how they had some great role players on that team, and I think it's been well documented over the other years that the players coming off the bench played their role to absolute perfection and were really good when they were called upon for either long minutes to usually replace Dennis when he was either injured or suspended that year, or just in their 5 or 10 minutes a game off the bench. Yeah, from Randy Brown, Judd Bushler, the Arizona Snipers, and Judd Bushler and Steve Kerr, as Johnny Kerr used to call them, all of the other role players, even Jack Haley in that one regular season game that he played during the year.
What a game that was. He played a super game that game, didn't he? 2 of 6 in the field, I think he was. So yeah, it was magnificent.
Amazing. I think even he served a purpose. Apparently he had a hand in keeping Dennis in check that year. So you also look at guys, along with Dennis, 2 more of the Detroit Piston bad boys in John Sally and James Edwards. John Sally in particular was excellent during the playoff run. The role players meshed with the stars, obviously really, really well to finish 72-10.
Definitely did, and it would be remiss of me to not do another shameless self-promotion here and mention that on episode 1 of this podcast, I chatted with Bill Wennington. He was very kind to be the first guest on the show, so that was inallairness.com/1 to hear the Bill Wennington chat. And also I spoke with Luke Longley, the great Australian centre, and he is on episode number 5, which is inallairness.com/5. So if you haven't checked those out already, definitely hear some great conversations with those guys about their time, particularly on that 95-96 team as well. So a couple of good conversations there. I couldn't help but throw those in, mate.
That's fine. Two guys that I've also had the pleasure of meeting in person as well, and they serve their purpose really well on those Chicago Bulls teams, but they're also really good human beings as well.
I'd definitely go along with that. And one stat that was overlooked in that 96 season, Jack Haley led the league in cheering. So he had a great season. He had 416 cheers for the year, which is quite good. Averaged about 4 a game, so 5 a game even. So well done to Jack Haley for that.
It's up for debate if he's going to be eligible sometime soon for that Hall of Fame.
Imagine him today in today's game. Like, we've got Robert Sacre. He's probably one of the greats that come to mind straight away with celebrations, but definitely Jack Haley is probably 20 years ahead of his time in terms of celebrations.
Yeah. Like everyone's always talking about Jordan and how he was ahead of his time in the 80s. Well, I mean, Robert Sacre is a poor man's Jack Haley.
All right, we better get on to the All-NBA first team from 1996. Penny Hardaway, MJ, Karl Malone, Scottie Pippen, and also the Admiral David Robinson. 3 of those 5 guys, David Robinson, Scottie Pippen, and Michael Jordan, were all defensive team as well. So a really handy first team that you'd love to have any day of the week.
One other guy on that team, Anthony Hardaway, it's often forgotten about how good that guy was when he was at his peak, which he was in 95-96. He was definitely in the conversation of the top 5 in the league at that time. He was incredible at 6'7" point guard, and had range on his shot, and unbelievable finisher.
He was a great player, Penny Hardaway, but unfortunately his career was somewhat stymied, if that's even a word, by the injuries that he suffered throughout as well. He did definitely lead the Orlando Magic, even though they had Shaq as their main man. I'm still thinking that Eastern Conference Finals, even though it was a 4-zip sweep, and we'll get to that shortly, Penny was really the main man that held that team together, I believe, but I might be wrong. What do you reckon?
He had excellent numbers in that Eastern Conference Final series against Chicago in the sweep. The matchup with Shaq was a good one because Shaquille was as dominant then as he ever was in his career.
Luke Longley, Bill Wennington, the Bulls pretty much had that centre by committee as well during the 96 season, and they had plenty of fouls and big bodies to actually throw at Shaq. So, and obviously he was plagued by some terrible free throw shooting throughout his career as well. So the hacker Shaq came into play a little bit as well, but the Bulls were really well prepared to be able to handle that. And obviously in my chat as well with Luke Rodman, I was about to say, that's an unusual mix. In my chat with Luke Longley, he was talking about how he actually enjoyed going up against Shaq and bodying up against him and trying to take him on as well, and that was an interesting insight to hear as well. So the Bulls were just a team that were perfectly suited to really, well, and they also exacted revenge against the Magic, no less, for 1995's disappointment too. So plenty of interesting storylines that weave their way throughout those playoffs, but let's quickly get into the all-rookie team. The first team for 1996 featured Michael Finley, Antonio McDyess, Arvydas Sabonis, who I think was about 39 at the time, Jerry Stackhouse, also Mighty Mouse, Damon Stoudemire, and
Joe Smith of the Golden State Warriors. Sabonis and Finley actually were a tie. So there were 6 players.
They were the all-rookie first team. Some pretty good names there. Unfortunately, McDyess, he had a really bad injury later in his career, which certainly held him back a bit, but he was incredibly athletic, great player in his first years in the career, and obviously Michael Finley was a very solid pro. Arvydas Sabonis came over to the league quite a few years later than when he was originally drafted. I think he was actually drafted back in the mid-'80s initially, so it took him a long time to actually finally make the NBA. Yeah, some good mixture of names there.
Yeah, Arvydas Sabonis, a typically highly skilled European player. You would have really loved to have seen him about 5 years earlier.
Oh, for sure. He was frightening. Some of the highlights that you see on YouTube of his career when he was over in Europe, he was just... And he had range as well.
Yeah, crazy skilled and could shoot the 3. Yeah, so we definitely missed out on not seeing more of him.
Yeah, he could certainly dial up from long range. There's no doubt about that. A couple of notable retirees, just quickly, from that 96 season. We had Magic Johnson, who came back out of retirement for that brief period of time. He still averaged 19 points, 7 boards, and 11 assists a game. So he returned midway through the season, played 32 games, but the Lakers were bundled out of the playoffs in the first round. But Magic retired finally for that second time. Then we also had Jeff Malone, Michael Adams, Alvin Robertson. James Edwards retired after the 96 season, so he got that last championship and then he retired.
Smart boy.
Yeah, he took that last title and then hit the road. And Doc Rivers, that was his final season as well, back in 1996. There's one notable retiree I'd like to just quickly bring up. That was Todd Munt. He played for the Hawks and the Celtics. He averaged 1.1 points. He got 1 rebound and 1 foul a game in 33 games played. He was very unlucky not to win Rookie of the Month at some stage during 1996. But, yeah, that's just the only reason I wanted to really bring him up. Sorry about that, mate. Couldn't help myself there.
I'm not sure how to recover from that, but yeah, when Magic came back halfway through that season, he was only halfway into his transition into looking like Shrek.
Gee, the gloves are off.
Todd Munt, Shrek. Where are we going with this?
Oh, gee. So, yeah, a few notable retirees there. Now, the random stat that I'd like to mention for this episode, in our last recap, I talked about the jersey numbers of certain players who had the jersey number to themselves. This time I'd like to mention there were 429 players that were on NBA rosters in 1996. 9 of them did not register a single assist for the season. Only one of those 9 players had played in more than 7 total games. And this guy I'm talking about played 58 games and started 23 of them. Yet he did not get 1 assist. Yinka Dare. Rest in peace.
Rest in peace, Yinka. Rest in peace.
Rest in peace, but seriously, that's 58 games. I know he was pretty much synonymous for the fact that he never chalked up an assist, but he played 58 games in a season, started 23 of them, and yet not once, didn't even ricochet off his elbow accidentally to somebody to score a basket. So,
definitely not a candidate for Rookie of the Month.
Exactly right. Yeah, he could have definitely been a Rookie of the Month candidate for sure. Couple of quick things, nicknames that never were. This segment was a real winner last episode. Some absolute fantastic feedback that I didn't receive. This time, got some great suggestions. The one that I probably enjoyed the best for fake nicknames that never were, Michael Magno. Now, I'm not even too sure if I'm pronouncing his surname right. Apologies, Michael, if I didn't. His Twitter handle is Nitwitter, at NITWITTAR. Michael suggested that Haywood Workman's nickname should have been the Bludger, which is quite clever when you think about it. Obviously, he's a workman, but the Bludger. So I really enjoyed that suggestion. Thanks, Michael. Hopefully, some of the people that are listening out there, next time we do throw out a question on Twitter about some more fake nicknames, please feel free to send them in, because I really enjoy that sort of stuff. I might be the only one that does. And also, crazed fan as well, Steve. He has been very good with some of the things that he submitted as well, but I had to go with Michael. Any suggestions or comments on that one at all, mate? Or you just want to let that go through to the keeper?
Just for any non-Australian listeners to the podcast, if anyone wants to know what the word bludger means, you can feel free to ask us. One random stat that I wanted to throw in was the beautiful job that Toni Braxton did on the Dallas Mavericks during that season. Apparently, at one point in time during the season, she was dating both Jason Kidd and Jim Jackson at the same time. 2 of the Triple J's, along with Jamal Mashburn. One of the most exciting upcoming NBA teams. Those 3 guys, sky was the limit. And Toni Braxton, thank you very much for splitting that up for us.
She's done very well. So not only was she an American singer-songwriter, she was also a
tramp.
Well, she obviously liked to put her name out there as well. So she pretty much was solely responsible for bringing the downfall of the Triple J's. Thanks for that, Tony. Appreciate it. Now, let's get into the playoffs and finals, mate. The Bulls rampaged through to the NBA Finals, effectively. They defeated the Miami Heat in a laugher, 3-0. The closest margin of victory was 17 points. So Game 1 was the closest that the Heat even got. So the Bulls were just on fire in that first round. They then progressed against the Knicks in a 5-game series. They won that one 4-1. The only game they did lose, I think, was an overtime game in Game 3 at New York. Do you have any particular thoughts or comments you wanted to make in relation to that first 2 rounds, Steenie?
Yeah, as a Heat hater even now, I still still revel in that first round smashing that we gave them back in '96. But it was one of those series that you had to get in and get out of ASAP. The second round against the Knicks was a bit of a letdown, considering the series that the Bulls and the Knicks had in the early '90s. It was a bit of a anticlimax. The Knicks did manage to steal an overtime win off them during that series. But yeah, it was after going 72-10, as I mentioned earlier on, the Bulls kept their momentum up during the higher pressure and the higher intensity of the playoffs and just walked straight through those teams.
Yep, and after beating the New York Knicks in 5, they then went on to sweep the Orlando Magic. So that was quite a result that perhaps not everyone expected in terms of a sweep. I was thinking maybe a 5-game series win at that stage, but they just decimated Orlando, and Game 4 was the equal closest game in the series. It was a 5-point margin, the same as Game 2. Game 1 really set the tone, though, for the series. The Bulls absolutely thumped the Magic. It was 121-83, and I think it was that particular game. Pre-game, Jordan was receiving the MVP award, and also was it that same first game that Horace Grant, who had then moved to the Orlando Magic, had that terrible elbow injury.
Come as a bitch that way. Horace had spent the '95 playoffs celebrating on the shoulders of his new Orlando Magic teammates as they beat the Bulls in '95, and the Magic lost Horace in Game 1 when Shaquille took him out actually and hyperextended his elbow. That was it for Horace for that series, and a massive loss for them. I'm not sure if it would have made too much of a difference to the series result, considering the other team that the Bulls were at that point in time. But yeah, a big loss for Orlando in Game 1.
Yeah, and on the replay, Horace Grant was just in the wrong spot at the wrong time, in between Shaq and I'm not sure who else the other person was, but as you said, his arm just hyperextended the wrong way, pretty much forming the letter V, which is never a good look. He was out for the rest of the season after that injury. In the Western Conference, the Supersonics advanced through the NBA Finals. They got to a 7-game series against the Jazz in the conference finals, and they held on to win 90-86 in Game 7 at Seattle to then get them into the NBA Finals for the first time in probably 17 years, I think since the 1979 Finals when they were coached by Lenny Wilkins. So that was an exciting matchup. Obviously, Bulls, Sonics, Sean Kemp and Peyton, and a very capable supporting cast up against the mighty Bulls, who had just roared through the regular season and playoffs. What do you recall about the lead up to the finals, Steenie?
In particular with the Orlando-Chicago series, after what had happened in '95 with Orlando beating Chicago in the Eastern Conference semi-finals. The team that the Magic had at that time was a fantastic team led by Shaquille and Penny, but they also had the likes of Dennis Scott, Brian Shaw and Nick Anderson. They had a great young team, offensively powerful. So I think there was a lot of anticipation for that series. I'm not so sure that Horace going out or not, that it was anticipated that the Bulls were going to kill them in the way that they did.
They had some good supporting players too. They also had Brian Shaw. I'm just looking at their roster now. Donald Royal, Anthony Bowie. Was it Anthony Bowie? That Bowie always gets me. I think it was Bowie. Anthony
Bowie, yeah. I'm pretty sure the owner of the worst triple-double in NBA history.
Seriously, more information, please.
Late in the game, he was 1 or 2 assists or rebounds short of a triple-double, and they shamelessly got him the stats that he needed in order to make up that triple-double. Obviously, a good game to get close to those stats, but as I mentioned, the worst triple-double in NBA history.
Closely behind that would have been Ricky Davis, going back a few years now as well. Do you remember Ricky Davis up against Utah in one particular game at Cleveland? He threw up a shot at his own basket, missed it deliberately to get the rebound, which then was to give him a triple-double at the time as well. And the Utah Jazz were livid. Jerry Sloan was going berserk. It was a very awkward moment as well. And just that Bowie, it's very hard to work out who's who, because I know that Sam Bowie, you know how you've got the Brian, don't call me Byron Russell?
Yep.
I think Sam Bowie initially went with
Sam, don't call me Bowie.
Just interesting little side note there. All right, so moving on, mate. We need to get to the NBA Finals. Let's chat about the Finals. Bulls won the NBA Championship in 6 games. They got off to a flying start. They were up 3-0. The first 2 games they won in Chicago, and then headed to Seattle for Game 3. And Luke Longley had a fantastic Game 3. Pretty much everyone had just written off the Sonics at that stage, said it was all over, bar the shouting. But to their credit, Seattle did fight back and won games 4 and 5, forcing a return trip for both teams to Chicago leading up to Game 6. What are some of your memories or insight into that particular NBA Finals?
I think that in the first 3 games, the 2 most important factors for the other Sonics was the way that they shot the ball, which was just horrendous. The percentages in the first 3 games were terrible, and also the inactivity of Gary Payton as well. His first 2 games were really poor. He finished with 13 points on 6 of 17 shooting in Game 1, and then another 13 points in Game 2, and for a very offensively minded point guard like he was, and it was very important for Seattle for him to score points. Yeah, his inactivity was a catalyst for them losing those first 2 games. Whereas Game 3, I think that they could have had an entire team of Sean Kemps in that game, and the way that the Bulls came out of the gate in that Game 3, no one was going to stop them in Game 3.
They were incredible in that Game 3. It was just so amazing that they could win by 20 plus, I think it was. It was 108-86, so a 22-point victory at Seattle. And I think the Sonics fans were just stunned at that point. So they were down 3-0, but they came back and trounced the Bulls in Game 4, 107-86. And in Game 5, it was close in parts, but the Sonics always were going to hang on pretty much, and they won by 11 points, leading up to a Game 6 return to Chicago. And the Bulls led pretty much throughout, and I believe even in the lead up to this chat today, you've been watching parts of, or maybe all of, Game 6 of that 1996 final series?
Yeah, I did. Game 4 and 5, the poor shooting that hampered the other Sonics in the first 3 games, bit the Bulls on the backside. In Game 4 and 5, they had a lot of trouble scoring the ball, and Seattle also got a lot of really good support from Hersey Hawkins, Detlef Schrempf, and Sam Perkins. And another big key, I think, Gary Payton played a lot better in Games 4 and 5. And I think that was partly due to the fact that Ron Harper barely played in those 2 games as well, as he was having injury issues during that series with his knee, I believe, which he had drained and then started Game 6.
Yeah, now Ron Harper, we haven't touched all that much on him for this particular season, but he's one of my favourite players of all time in terms of just players in general, and when he came to join the Bulls, it just added to that because he was such an athletic, great player in his early career. He had some injuries and some key injuries throughout, which did stop him, but he still had a fantastic career, and his performance in helping the Bulls on to that 72-10 season and beyond, and also his time with the Bulls prior to Jordan even coming back from baseball and just retirement in general. He was a great Bulls player that was somewhat overlooked but should not be forgotten in the least.
Once he got there, he sacrificed his scoring. It was a very high-scoring guard with the Cavs and the Clippers. It's always good to see a star player like Harps realise his role on a team. He realised who he had on that Bulls team in 96, and he figured out pretty quickly what he needed to do to get minutes, which also got him the starting job. And yeah, he was very effective, especially on Gary Payton in the finals.
Yep, and Harper was a really good defender. He might have been even overlooked somewhat during his time playing, but
long arms.
Yeah, a good reach, and just a great guy to have on the court, particularly given his size as well. 6'6", nice size guard. So he did some great things in Chicago, but some fantastic moves. I remember a 360 layup he did when he was back with Cleveland, just a crazy 360, and very athletic guy, could jump out of the gym before his injuries. With the Clippers was a mini Showtime type team in the Clippers. Like, they mightn't have achieved well into the playoffs at all, but they were an exciting team to watch in the years that he also played with them.
Yeah, to be called a poor man's Michael Jordan is a hell of a compliment, and that's how amazing of an athlete that the guy was. And I think that the way that he came to the Bulls and reinvented himself and kept his starting job for the other time that he was at the Bulls and sacrificed his role is what endeared him to all the Bulls fans too.
Yeah, for sure. One other quick memory of Ron. They used to wear occasionally these orange jerseys, Cleveland, back in the day. And there's a couple of highlights where you see a young Ron Harper just flying to the hoop and he's got his orange jersey on. There's some sweet memories in those jerseys. I really liked watching those. So just a random bit of stat there for you. One quick thing I wanted to mention about the 96 Sonics team. They had some really good role players as well on their bench. For some reason, there's a certain players that I identify with and like for various reasons, but they had some great players. Like Detlef Schrempf's one of my favourite players. Hersey Hawkins. You mentioned Big Smooth Sam Perkins. Nate McMillan, Vincent Askew, Eric Snow even. For some particular reason, certain players just jump out and they still stay in my memory bank for whatever reason. And are there any sort of players like that sort of do still attract your attention even these 15, 20 years on?
Yeah, like rookie Eric Snow, I believe it was.
Yeah.
In that season, he went on to have a pretty decent career. But if you look at guys like Nate McMillan, Vincent Askew, and David Wingate, like all really tough, nuggety players.
Mm-hmm.
Real strong defensively. Not the best offensive guys, but George Karl also had himself a pretty good crew of role players in Seattle in that year.
He did. David Wingate and MJ actually got called for double fouls at one stage during the 96 finals. They got into a bit of trash talk and a bit of pushing and shoving, heated discussion. So there were certain players that Jordan obviously really liked to get right up in the face of, and Wingate was one of those ones that would never back down, even though he had limited minutes in that particular series. So the Bulls would win in the sixth game. They'd win by 12 points and in front of their home crowd, so they got to celebrate. That was only the second time they'd won at home. They won the 92 finals at home and the 96 finals at home. So two of the first four titles were in Chicago, and they really celebrated that fact as well. Jordan finished the series averaging just over 27 points, 5 boards, 4 assists and almost 2 steals a game. He was named NBA Finals MVP. Pippen was about 16 points a game, 8 boards, 5 assists, 2 steals and also a block, so ably assisted there as well. Kemp had a really good series. Do you remember the first couple of games? Kemp was scoring close to 30 a game, getting huge boards. He really did keep them in it and was a contender for MVP, even though he was on the losing team.
Yeah, Sean Kemp had 32 and 8 in Game 1 and 29 and 13 in Game 2. He had an excellent series. It was a bit of a coming-of-age series for him, especially like to pull that out in the NBA Finals. Just going back to Scotty, the one thing that hampered Scotty so much in that series was his shooting. I think going into Game 6, he was shooting about 32% from the field. I think he was also dealing with some injury issues as well during that series. So, yeah, shot the ball very poorly. And you mentioned before that Jordan won the series MVP. I think in close consideration would have had to been Dennis as well. Dennis had 2 games where he finished with 11 offensive rebounds in, I think it was Game 2 and Game 6, which tied the NBA record at that time. Dennis was a massive factor for the Bulls, not only during the regular season and the 72 wins, but all the way through the playoffs.
Yeah, very true. We actually did overlook him a little bit, but looking back at the composite box scores here for the finals, in just over 37 minutes a game, he averaged almost 8 points, 15 boards, 2.5 assists, almost 1 steal a game. So that in itself is some fantastic numbers, and he was a key cog in the Chicago Bulls machine that was that 1996 team. So it was their 4th title in 6 years. In the 4 NBA finals that Jordan had been in, that was his 4th finals MVP as well. So they were on their way to really running through the league again for the next couple of years too. What would you like to add there, mate? Anything you want to continue with?
Yeah, definitely. On top of the 8 points and 15 boards, I think Dennis also got into the heads pretty well of guys like Sean Kemp and Frank Bukowski as well. Got into the heads, which made it very entertaining to watch them trying to deal with Dennis, not only on the boards, but from a mental standpoint as well, because he had them in all sorts in that series, had them very upset at times.
I did. It was a fantastic performance in Game 1 of the finals where Rodman was trying to sucker Bukowski into reacting to certain things, and I think Bukowski was given the heave-ho pretty early on in Game 1, and as he was walking in front of the Bulls bench, he was giving it to anybody that wanted to listen. I think he gave Phil Jackson a fair bit. He gave Jack Haley a bit of a mouthful too.
Rennie Brown gave him a bit of a shot too, I think, or like he kind of stood out from the rest of the bench a little bit more, and then as Brickhouse walked past, he kind of cheekily walked into his path just to give him one last rib on the way out.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then I believe it was Game 3 during the Bulls' whitewash of Seattle in Seattle was when Rodman would actually stand and face Bukowski during free throws, and he'd just start smiling at him. He'd also just have his arms behind his back. Yes. And was just smiling at him, just trying to bait him as well. So there's some really good moments there where this day and age, I think you'd be pretty much teed up immediately for that sort of behaviour now. But you can barely look at somebody the wrong way these days before getting teed up. So, yeah, just some really good memories throughout that entire final series. If you're a Bulls fan, of course. The Sonics just fell a little bit short.
We mentioned earlier on the risk reward aspect with Dennis obviously came out as a positive for the Bulls because it was huge during that span of 94 through to about 98, where he probably should have made at least probably 2 or 3 all-star teams at least, but because he had upset the league office, I think, on more than one occasion. He ridiculously didn't make it, which even now I think it was just a joke with some of the numbers that he had, not just with the Bulls but with San Antonio as well. But I think because he was a bit of a bad boy and he upset David Stern and his cronies, he missed out on a few all-star games.
I hope David Stern and Adam Silver and those sort of guys don't listen to. Well, actually, I hope they do listen to the podcast. But
yeah, I'm fine with that.
They might be they might be tracking you down, mate. Look out for the men in black suits to turn up at your house any moment. You could hear a knock on the door.
Well, my address is no, actually, I won't give the address out. But if David Stern and Adam Silver would like to speak to me, please help yourself. Here I am, guys.
Hit you up. Speaking of hitting you up, could you actually just tell us how can we get in touch with you, mate, if we want to reach out and chat more Chicago Bulls or just NBA in general? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Can be reached on my Twitter handle, which is @Steeny, which is STEHNY. Also, my good friend Adam Howes and I are the co-administrators of the Johnny Red Kerr page on Facebook. If anyone would like to speak NBA or Bulls in particular, I guess, @Steeny on Twitter, or come check us out on the Johnny Red Kerr page on Facebook.
Excellent. And you're doing some great work on that Johnny Red Kerr page. It's something that I visit every day and certainly see what's going on with the conversation. And you've got some great followers there. You've got over 4,200 likes. So you're doing some really good things. And speaking of Facebook pages, I might as well plug mine as well. Shameless self-promotion continues. Facebook.com/in all airness. So please, if you do enjoy the podcast, head over to that page and add a like. It certainly helps with all the rankings and things like that and just spreading the word. So I do appreciate all the support that the podcast has been receiving, and been very fortunate to be able to chat to some great guests, yourself included, Stanley. So thanks again for joining me for another recap of the NBA season. We've got plenty more suggestions that are coming in as well on Twitter. If you want to hear anything in particular, those that are out there listening to this podcast, you want to hear something broken down into an episode like this, then please hit us up. I'm @in all airness, so that's me, or drop Stanny a line as well. Anything else you'd like to add, Stanny, before we wrap this thing up?
No, all done. Thanks very much for having me on again and speaking about another season of the golden era of the NBA, mate.
More than welcome, mate.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter @inallairness. Please visit the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.